From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I want to address directly the concerns many of you have raised about the mistakes I made in preparing my tax returns. These were careless mistakes. They were avoidable mistakes, but they were...
Despite problems with unpaid taxes, Treasury Secretary Jim Geithner was confirmed by the Senate last week. But Tom Daschle, President Obama's nominee for Health and Human Services, had to withdraw his nominations for his own tax lapses. Today, the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting team Jim Steele and Don Bartlett on the breakdown of America's tax system and why they say Geithner's lapses were far more egregious than Daschle's, then wired for war.
The U.S. military went into Iraq with a handful of drones in the air. We now have 5,300. We went into Iraq with 0 unmanned ground systems. We now have 12,000.
We'll speak with author P.W. Singer about the robotics revolution and conflicts in the 21st century. Then the Cuban Five appealed to the Supreme Court for a new trial. We'll speak with their attorney. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A bipartisan group of senators is seeking to cut at least $80 billion from President Obama's $900 billion economic stimulus plan. Most of the cuts would come to education spending, including $40 billion for state programs. President Obama, meanwhile, has intensified his push for Senate approval. Speaking before Energy Department employees, Obama warned of catastrophe if the stimulus bill isn't passed.
If we do not move swiftly to sign the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act into law, an economy that is already in crisis will be faced with catastrophe. This is not my assessment. This is not Nancy Pelosi's assessment. This is the assessment of the best economists in the country.
Obama, meanwhile, has signed into law an expansion of government health insurance for low-income children following congressional approval last month. The $33 billion expansion of the state children's health insurance program, known as SCHIP, will be funded in part by a tax increase on cigarette packs. Former President George W. Bush twice vetoed similar measures. A congressional investigation has found the Bush administration overpaid tens of billions of dollars in its purchase of bank stocks and assets under the Wall Street bailout. The Congressional Oversight Panel says the government received assets with a market value worth at least $78 billion less than what it invested. That translates to a roughly 30-cent loss for every dollar the government spent. The number of American workers filing for new unemployment benefits has hit a 26-year high. Claims for state unemployment insurance rose by 35,000 last week to 626,000. The key whistleblower in the Bernie Madoff fraud case has criticized government regulators for ignoring repeated warnings. Harry Markopolos told lawmakers he began warning Securities and Exchange Commission officials about Madoff in 2000. Markopolos said the SEC didn't take action in large part because of incompetence and deference to financial interests. He said, quote, "I gift-wrapped and delivered the largest Ponzi scheme to them." Markopolos also criticized the Wall Street Journal for failing to pick up the story. He said Wall Street Journal editors apparently refused to let a senior reporter follow the story after Markopolos had tipped him off. The last military tribunal at Guantanamo has been dropped in compliance with President Obama's order to close the prison. The prosecution of USS Cole bombing suspect Abdurrahim al-Nashiri was the last active case at Guantanamo. All charges have been dropped, but Nashiri will remain jailed. The announcement came on the eve of a White House meeting today between Obama and families and victims of the Cole bombing and 9/11 attacks. President Obama's nominee to head the CIA, Leon Panetta, appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee Thursday as part of his confirmation hearings. Panetta said he believes waterboarding amounts to torture, but discouraged prosecutions against those who carried it out.
I've expressed the opinion that I believe that waterboarding is torture and that it's wrong. More importantly, the President has expressed the same opinion. Having said that, I also believe, as the President has indicated, that those individuals who operated pursuant to a legal opinion that indicated that that was proper and legal ought not to be prosecuted or investigated.
Panetta is expected to win an easy confirmation despite Republican opposition. Meanwhile, a Senate panel has delayed a vote on President Obama's Labor Secretary nominee, Democratic Congressmember Hilda Solis of California. The move followed the disclosure Solis's husband paid a $6,000 penalty to settle tax liens as much as 16 years old. The liens came on an auto repair business owned solely by the husband. Solis's confirmation vote had already been delayed amidst Republican opposition to her support for labor groups. Newly released figures show 73% of arrests made under a federal program to target fugitive immigrants nab people who didn't have criminal records. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement's National Fugitive Operations Program was billed as an effort to target immigrants posing threats to national security. But according to the Migration Policy Institute, just 18% of the nearly 97,000 arrested had criminal records. 34% had no outstanding deportation orders, but were arrested anyway. Meanwhile, in Arizona, a county sheriff is coming under criticism for parading a group of chained, undocumented prisoners through the streets of Phoenix. Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio rounded up some 200 prisoners before their transfer to the infamous Tent City Jail. Arpaio is known for targeting immigrants and arresting them if they can't prove documented residency. Joanne Lynn of the American Civil Liberties Union called the latest action an attempt to humiliate the prisoners.
Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County, Arizona, actually closed down a public road in order to create the spectacle of this parade of 200 immigrants in a chain gang. Clearly, this was designed to be a public spectacle, designed to humiliate all these 200 people and actually immigrant communities generally. Were he really interested in actually transferring them, he could have put them on a bus or on a van.
Last year, a group of Latino activists in Arizona filed a lawsuit accusing Arpaio of racial profiling. In Los Angeles, the city councils agreed to pay a nearly $13 million settlement to immigration activists and bystanders injured during the LAPD's crackdown on a May Day rally in MacArthur Park in 2007. Police with riot guns fired hundreds of rubber bullets, shot tear gas, and clubbed protesters and journalists during the crackdown. In Israel and the occupied territories, the Israeli government has deported 10 passengers aboard a Lebanese ship trying to deliver aid supplies to the Gaza Strip. The ship's owner, Mohammed Youssef, said Israeli forces opened fire on the passengers and assaulted them after coming aboard.
We contacted the ship, and we've been told by the captain what happened, that it was stopped by the Israelis, and it was fired upon, and soldiers boarded the ship and attacked the captain, passengers, and crew. I appeal to the United Nations and the European countries to protect the people on board the ship, and also to send the aid and supplies to the people in Gaza. And we are calling on the people to help the Palestinians get rid of this blockade.
Another 18 passengers are believed to still remain in Israeli custody. The Brotherhood ship was carrying 60 tons of supplies, including medical aid, food, and books. As Israel blocks aid ships from reaching Gaza, dock workers in South Africa are refusing to unload Israeli goods at their ports. The South African Transport and Allied Workers Union says it'll no longer unload Israeli ships in solidarity with Palestinians. Last year, South African dock workers refused to unload a Zimbabwe weapons shipment in protest of the Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. At the State Department Thursday, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton repeated the Obama administration's commitment to follow the Bush administration policy of boycotting Hamas.
I would only add that our conditions respecting Hamas are very clear. We will not in any way negotiate with or recognize Hamas until they renounce violence, recognize Israel, and agree to abide by, as the Foreign Minister said, the prior agreements entered into by the PLO and the Palestinian Authority.
The U.S. position has been criticized in part because it refuses to impose the same conditions on Israel. Israel refuses to renounce violence, recognize a Palestinian state, and abide by agreements, including a pledge to freeze settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank. Clinton also addressed a growing controversy in Kyrgyzstan, where the U.S. stands to lose a key air base critical to the Afghan occupation. The Kyrgyz government has announced it's closing the Manas air base because of public opposition and a U.S. refusal to pay a higher fee.
It's regrettable that this is under consideration by the government of Kyrgyzstan, and we hope to have further discussions with them. But we will proceed in a very effective manner, no matter what the outcome of